Hello and welcome to Bread of Life, a daily devotional program which each week features a different area pastor to encourage you from God's Word. Our speaker for this week is Pastor John Bickel of Branford.
Welcome back to the Bread of Life broadcast. This is day 2 of this week's broadcast. Delighted to be with you. I'm Pastor Bickel from Community Baptist Church in Branford, Connecticut. And yesterday I introduced our topic and our passage, the passage being Psalm 51, verses 16 and 17, and the topic that we find here, the words of David, is the value of a broken heart. And I'd like to focus on verse 16, where David said, "For thou desirest not sacrifice, else would I give it. Thou delightest not in burnt offering." And what we find here in David's words is the limited value of outward sacrifice. Again, the limited value of outward sacrifice. There certainly is value in sacrifice, any sacrifice that we make to God. In fact, God built a whole system of worship for his people around sacrifice. But there's something that David understands is important for sacrifice to mean something, to have value. And we find that in verse 17 where he says the sacrifices of God, or the sacrifices that God desires most of all, above all else, are a broken spirit, a broken and a contrite heart, O God, he says, thou wilt not despise. And so there is limited value in outward sacrifice. And I'd like to give you 2 thoughts here. Number 1, outward sacrifices without an inward heart of contrition are worthless. Outward sacrifices without an inward heart of contrition are worthless. And David understood that as he pours out his heart and prayer to God here in Psalm 51. He comes to this point where he acknowledges before God that God did not want primarily sacrifice. He says there in verse 16, else would I give it. God was looking for something more important. He was looking for something that would underlie a genuine sacrifice. He says, thou delightest not in burnt offering. And so David gives us a very important principle here, and that is that outward sacrifices without an inward heart of contrition are worthless. In Isaiah chapter 1, we find the vision that God gave to Isaiah to share with his people. And in verses 10 through 20 of that chapter, we find God's opinion of their sacrifices. And it's very clear that sacrifices that were given without a heart of love behind them, and that to God was unacceptable. Their sacrifices were limited in the value they brought to the intended receiver. In fact, they were so limited that God considered them worthless. What was in the place of a love of God behind the sacrifices was a love for self. And God's people were sacrificing with a heart of self, with a self-seeking and a self-serving attitude that God found detestable. And God made it very clear to them that their outward sacrifices without an inward heart of contrition were worthless to him. As we pick up tomorrow, we'll look at a second thought here. I'll give you the thought here to consider yourself. Outward sacrifices without an inward heart of contrition are hypocritical. Thanks for joining me today. Look forward to our time together tomorrow.
You've been listening to Pastor John Bickel of Branford, our featured speaker this week on Bread of Life, a program to encourage you from God's Word.